Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to our podcast, The Making and the Remaking of a Codependent Mind. We decided for this episode to revisit the foundational idea of the podcast, that being codependency. When we started the podcast months ago now, we had a certain idea of what that word meant, but we've learned quite a bit since then from doing the podcast and talking with each other, reading more about it, and also hearing from people who have listened about their experiences.
Yeah, we got some really good questions and feedback that kind of sent us in some more nuanced directions. And then these episodes that we've done this season where we've zeroed in on individual topics have kind of added some additional details.
So we wanted to go back and relook at the way that we talked about codependency in that first episode and think through whether we want to make any modifications or updates to that definition.
Yeah, and it's helpful to just kind of remind ourselves exactly what it means to begin with, because sometimes you get lost in the terminology, and
absolutely,
it's like when you're trying to work on something, it's like, oh wait, I need to remember exactly what it is I'm supposed to be looking for here.
So to go back to the beginning,
initially it was a way to understand people who seem to become addicted or kind of dependent on caretaking, on trying to fix their partner, as kind of maybe a sense of purpose or an identity. So with, say an alcoholic, and then the codependent person becomes sort of addicted to helping, kind of chronically helping this addicted person.
Right. So it came out, like we said in that very first episode, it came out of addiction literature, specifically in relation to alcoholics, where you had alcoholics are dependent on alcohol, and then the codependent, is almost dependent on their partner being dependent on alcohol.
Yeah, right. It's like this unbreakable cycle almost.
I mean, one thing that I don't really like about that definition, and I also don't like about the word, is it kind of defines the codependent, that person's experience solely in relation to this other disordered person.
Right. It's not putting a lot of focus on, okay, but why? Why are they that way?
Yeah, it's almost like the alcoholism and the other person is more important.
Yeah, right.
Than fleshing out the codependence experience. Much like when you were reading about narcissism, people would talk about the people who were in a relationship with a narcissist as being a kind of co-narcissist.
Right.
And it does kind of capture what's happening with these people in that you would kind of mirror or subsume yourself under the other person's experience. So yeah, if they were alcoholic, then that became the most important thing in your life as well. If they're a narcissist, that became the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
But again, we're not interested in the narcissist or the alcoholics ultimately. Ultimately, when we want to understand the codependent person's experience and put that front and center in the discussion.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's going to be the only way you're actually going to start to heal, is to figure out what's going on with me, not with these other people necessarily. It's understanding those relationships is important, but yeah, ultimately it's like, what is causing me to behave this way?
So the definition that we used in episode 1, you want to read that again?
Sure. Yeah. It's codependency is an imbalanced relationship pattern where one person assumes responsibility for meeting another person's needs to the exclusion of acknowledging their own needs or feelings.
Yeah, and looking back on that, I'm not too fond of that definition now,
either
for the same reason.
Short. Yeah,
because it's just about defining the codependent experience in relation to other people. When it's a lot richer than that.
Yeah, and it doesn't really say anything about the habitual nature of it, and
or where it came from.
Right.
So let's try for another kind of definition centered around codependency being a set of behaviors developed to cope with the chronic toxic stress that comes from feeling powerless. So that powerless feeling could have emerged from a chaotic childhood, an abusive childhood, a childhood where there was neglect, essentially a childhood which is a time when you are supposed to be protected and to be made to feel safe.
Right.
So you can grow and develop. A childhood in which you were made to feel the opposite.
Yes.
That seems to be a common thread. A childhood in which you were made to take responsibility for another person's or people's feelings and needs, and were taught either directly or indirectly that your own needs and feelings were not important and maybe even dangerous.
And it's extra powerful when this happens in childhood because the child doesn't have a frame of reference yet.
Mm-hmm.
The person's learning this stuff for the first time, learning that this is how I need to behave.
This is how I need to behave to be safe,
Mm-hmm.
to be cared for, to be loved. I have to adopt these set of behaviors to cope with this feeling of powerlessness.
So then you wind up with these behaviors like the people-pleasing we've talked about, the caretaking, emotional suppression as a result of feeling powerless, compliance and deference to others. And then my only access to power is to defer to other people's power rather than feeling my own. And then my only access to safety is to make other people feel safe and comfortable.
So the set of behaviors are those behaviors that you listed that make up this phenomena of codependency.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that you are dependent on other people, that came about because you were made to feel dependent on other people.
Yeah.
Instead of a childhood in which you're cared for and empowered to become the type of person that you want to be, you were encouraged to feel powerless.
Right.
That's what violence does. That's what abuse does. That's what neglect does.
Mm-hmm.
You were encouraged to feel powerless and to feel that the only access you had to safety and care and love and power was to people please, caretake, suppress your own emotions, comply with the people around you, defer to the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then as I grew up, these behaviors then become habitual and reflexive. And so they may have kept me safe when I was a child because I had no other choice, kind of. It's just like this person, like the friend we're talking about, or my father just forcing me into this position. But then once it becomes ingrained and now it's reflexive, I just carry that forward. And then all my future interpersonal relationships, I'm just behaving the same way. And then it just becomes this second nature way of behaving.
And we've said this before, none of these behaviors are inherently bad.
Yeah, sure.
The instinct to care for each other, to please each other, even
be responsive to other people's emotions.
Be responsive to other people's emotions. Exactly. That's deeply ingrained. Those are natural human emotions. In fact, if you don't have them, then you're a psychopath or a sociopath. Right. I mean, we talked about your abusive friend G as potentially being some version of a psychopath.
Yeah, you seem to have no empathy at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yay. I mean, it's important to be that emotionally responsive person. But what happened for you, and I think for many, is they get hijacked in the service of keeping yourself safe when you were powerless as a child. And that is not what they were designed for. And we said this before. These emotions seem to be about binding us together, helping us make and maintain intimate human connection.
Yeah.
And as you became an adult and these behaviors just became habitual and dominant in every relationship, they do the opposite. They don't help you find and maintain intimate human connections. They don't even keep you safe.
Yeah.
In fact, they attract unsafe people and you get stuck in unsafe relationships.
Yeah. I mean, they attract as in maybe not, I have to meet the person first, obviously.
Yes.
But then it's like, wow, this person really makes me feel comfortable when when this person that I'm attracting doesn't normally feel that. Because for whatever reason, maybe their personality is kind of off-putting to the average person. But yeah, someone with codependent tendencies, that's reflectively making everyone feel comfortable.
Right.
Oops. Yeah.
So then these relationships somehow replay that childhood.
Yeah.
Those childhood relationships. But given that, as we're saying, these are natural human emotions and responses to other people, we would expect everyone to do some version of those.
Yeah, exactly.
The caretaking, the people-pleasing, the compliance, the deference.
Right, because kind of like we talk about in every episode here, there's always the healthy versions of all of this stuff that we're talking about here, these codependent behaviors.
And also, codependency itself, there seems to be a very wide spectrum.
Yes.
So we were going to kind of talk about that spectrum a little bit to see if people could recognize maybe where they fall on that spectrum, because we hear a lot of people being concerned about whether the emotions that they're having are quote unquote healthy or natural, or if they're codependent, right?
Yeah.
So if I do this, is that codependency?
Right.
Or is that something that's appropriate to do? And it can be difficult because it is a spectrum.
Yeah.
So on the low end of the spectrum, I think we both know quite a few people who kind of exist on that.
Yeah, that just
that low
have
end.
some of the behaviors and they're not very severe.
Yeah, so we'll see the over-apologizers.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people who over-apologize.
Yep.
Conflict avoidance.
Yeah, kind of like peacekeeping.
Peacekeeping, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of the people-pleasing. You can see that even in people who maybe aren't on the severe spectrum.
Yeah, but there's a lot of different brands of that. Again, there's like spectrums of each of these behaviors even.
Yeah,
too,
right.
You know?
And the people-pleasers often have kind of wide circle of friends, but maybe not very close friends. Because as we talked about, the ways that people-pleasing can interrupt intimacy and real connection. But, so we know some people that have all those behaviors, or some of them, they're conflict avoiding. They tend to over-apologize. They tend to maybe do too much people-pleasing, and they have difficulty standing up for themselves, perhaps. But it doesn't seem to interfere severely with their ability to form and maintain healthy friendships and relationships.
Even though they exhibit some of these behaviors when they gather a few of the wrong people, they do have several healthy relationships. And these behaviors might not come out at all, really, in those healthy relationships.
Or not enough that it
affects anything.
It severely limits their ability to connect with their partner or with their friends. Although, when I think about, again, people in my life that I see some of these behaviors with, it does seem that they, in addition to having healthy relationships and friendships, they also seem always to have one or two people in their life where I'm kind of like, why are you friends with that person?
Yeah. Right.
Like, that person seems unpleasant and not very nice. And I think that's a sign too of being on the codependency spectrum. If you have people in your life that you make excuses for.
Yes, exactly. Right.
And I've heard those excuses from friends and people in my life when I've questioned their friendship or their relationship with a particular person. And it often sounds like things like, oh, well, she or he has been a good friend to me for a long time. Or, oh, she or he helped me out when I was going through my divorce, or when this was happening, or helped me move. And in fact, I had one friend who literally said to me about this friendship in his life, oh, she isn't always a bitch to me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I think that's a sign, again, of being on the low end of this codependency spectrum. If you have people in your life that you make excuses for, because I don't have anyone in my life that treats me badly, even not occasionally. Not to say that no one's ever said anything hurtful, or that I've never to a friend made a mistake or a misstep and said something hurtful or flaked on their birthday or something. I mean, occasionally people make mistakes.
But that's not what we're talking about.
We're not talking about occasional missteps that are then apologized for or recognized and repair is made. We're talking about fairly regularly a friend who kind of treats you badly, is rude, is dismissive.
Selfish.
Is selfish, flakes.
Yeah.
Which is not to say they're always that way, because as we know, I mean, especially say narcissists, it's very intermittent. It's deliberately intermittent.
Yes.
So yeah, one weekend they're helping you move and being the best friend you've ever had, and then 2 weeks later they're
throwing you under the bus.
For some reason, exactly. But then you're like, oh, but they helped me move. It's like, no, like that doesn't. I think. For a lot of people, they don't have people in their life that treat them badly. Then we're probably actually moving to the middle of the spectrum.
Yeah, when you look at just those particular relationships.
When you start to have more people in your life who treat you badly than you do who treat you well. Because I think that's kind of what happens over time, is that the more you tolerate from the people in your life, the more those type of people crowd out and take space away from the healthier friendships that you could be forming.
Right. And one of the big behaviors that go with codependency is a lack of boundaries. It's because it's too scary, really, and you feel too powerless or don't have enough agency of your own to have boundaries. So yeah, the more of these people you get in your life, the more difficult it is to get rid of them. Now you're making more excuses. Now you're exercising the behaviors more, and they're becoming even more ingrained.
More habitual, right?
More habitual, yeah.
You're right. That's when the habits really are interfering with you forming and maintaining healthy relationships and friendship.
Even relationships with otherwise kind of healthy people, or maybe unhealthy but not abusive people, can still be problematic because of these reflexive behaviors.
You're speaking now about your long-term friendship.
Yeah, we talked about when we were in the relationships episode, I forget, this season or maybe last season, about how I had this friendship for a really long time where we were disordered people, but neither one of us were abusive. So it was comfortable, it was safe, we had good conversations, we had kind of an otherwise good relationship, but there were these problems of codependency, behaviors of mine that came out that wouldn't have come out in a healthy relationship. So an example that I think of is he struggled with his environment. Like he had a hard time adapting when we would go out. So in particular, like say we went to restaurants on the weekend, he had a hard time adapting to his environment. He felt very uncomfortable. At least once or twice, every time we went to a restaurant, he had to move. That's a little uncomfortable to have to ask. They seat you somewhere. I mean, right, every restaurant has their own reasons for seating you at a particular table for the servers or whatever it is. But he always wanted to move because it's just like he didn't like the view. He didn't like there was somebody facing him or something that he felt uncomfortable that they were facing him. Or so we'd do that. And then also he would order food and then not like, and he says, I don't really like this, I can't eat this. And so my behaviors would be to go, okay, well, here, do you like mine? Let's trade.
Right.
I'm trying to
manage his
emotions.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no problem. Let's move. Like sometimes we move 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Tables. And yeah, so I'm just kind of what do I need to do? What can I do to help here?
So was clearly kind of struggling with some mental health issues, emotional health issues. And rather than helping him confront that, you were almost enabling him to not confront the mental and emotional health issues.
Right. It's like, oh, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Here, just take my food. Like,
right.
We can get through this. We'll enjoy this dinner. I'll just. And
you read about and hear about people who are in a kind of friendship like that, where potentially maybe 2 people with codependency habits.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's very isolating, as it was for the 2 of you.
Yeah.
Because you do almost become dependent on each other.
Yeah, kind of. Right. I know.
Neither of you particularly good at managing your emotions or kind of confronting the larger world. And so you just kind of isolate within this small.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily codependency directly, and I remember at the time the 2 of us used that word as like, oh, maybe we're codependent, just thinking that it meant that the 2 of us were dependent on each other, which isn't really a very accurate description of it, but it could be an element of it.
Well, if it is, yeah. And so we're talking about a set of behaviors that develop to cope with a feeling of powerlessness. And if you both had similar behaviors, you could end up reinforcing those habits in each other, which sounds like what was happening.
Yeah. So each of us individually didn't feel safe and very powerful, but we kind of just propped each other up in a way. Just I'm doing my codependent behaviors to prop up his powerlessness, and he's doing codependent behaviors to prop up my powerlessness. And all right, between the 2 of us, we're just in this suspended state of propping each other up,
preventing you from really kind of healing or growing or forming other relationships.
Yeah, because everyone else was unsafe still, which is kind of how I felt chronically already.
And so I think you see in that middle section of the spectrum, isolation, in addition to the behaviors that we described on the low end, those behaviors are now causing much more damage in your life. And you see a lot of isolation, feelings of resentment and frustration, not knowing why you can't form healthy relationships or find people who will treat you well.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing really that kept me safe during that period was that I didn't make myself available to anyone else. So as I found once I did, I met and I got involved with the wrong people, then the codependent behaviors became 10 times worse.
So then we're moving into the severe section of the spectrum.
So this is like fully activated now. So we've mentioned this before, and I really like thinking of, we talk about trauma being at the source. It may not be the case for every person that exhibits codependent behaviors, especially on the lower end of the spectrum. But in my case, and I think anyone that has severe codependent behaviors, it's going to come from trauma.
Some kind of trauma, which again can be chaos, abuse, neglect. It doesn't have to be this one.
It doesn't have to be one incident or something like that. Yeah, it can be just chronic, long-term trauma. And then the codependent behaviors are a trauma response. So when we talk about trauma responses, we're talking about you're kind of getting sent into this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, this reactionary mode, and the codependent behaviors are what come out of that mode.
Or the reaction, right?
Yeah, the reaction. So I'm being directly attacked. I'm being actually abused physically or mentally or emotionally, and I'm freeze. I'm in freeze. I can't deal with it. I'm just sitting there and taking it. And then in the in-between times, I'm anticipating abuse. And so I'm fawning. I'm doing everything I can to try to avoid another situation like the previous time. What happened? What led to that? Okay, what do I need to do to avoid that? What do I need to say to this person? How can I make them feel extra comfortable, extra safe so that doesn't happen again? And then just keep doing that and doing that. And if you're with an abusive person, like a narcissist or something like that, it's just going to make it worse and worse and worse. They're going to keep taking advantage of it, and you're stuck.
Right. So if you're meshed with a toxic person, at that point, you're in a state of almost constant trigger.
Yeah.
People use the term hypervigilance. You're either, as you're saying, kind of feeling attacked because you're being attacked, or anticipating, trying to prepare for the next attack.
Which is also triggering because they're full of fear and shame too. Shame from the last time it happened and the fact that I'm putting up with this and things. So it's this big web of shame and fear.
And if we're thinking about the analogy with alcoholism or drug addiction, the low end of the spectrum for codependency, where you have some of these habits, but they're not interfering with your life. It's almost like they're functional alcoholics.
Yeah, kind of right. Yeah.
But at the severe end, where you're fully activated in a toxic relationship, then it's just affects every aspect of your life.
Yeah.
Financial, emotional, sexual, social.
Yeah.
All of it is being compromised.
Every potential other relationship that could come along is going to be affected also. So you're bringing that other person into the chaos.
And when you're in that state, fully activated, you cannot heal.
No.
I was thinking of the analogy. It's kind of like the kitchen plumbing is broken and there's water pouring out all over the floor, and all you do is constantly mop it up.
Yeah.
And so you never really get ahead, right?
Yeah. Right. Just, and this applies to so many different disorders and diseases or whatever. Just treating the symptoms as opposed to trying to
getting to the source
and actually healing.
So we talked about in the first episode of season 2, focusing on the healing that you did. That one of the foundational things you needed to do was to get out of actively abusive situations.
Yeah, I mean that's step one, really.
So that would be, in my analogy, akin to you got to turn the water source off. Still water all over the floor.
Yeah,
but at least you have a chance now,
right,
to figure out what is actually happening.
Yeah, and this obviously easier said than done. You know, I mean, like we said, though, other people are going to be key in that. Really hard to just do that in a void. For one thing, it's hard to admit to it enough to even just convince yourself that this is happening. But other people are going to make that much easier. And other people are going to help through the whole process.
Yeah, because they're going to come in and they're going to see the water pouring out of the pipes and you mopping the floor and be going, why are you mopping the floor?
Yeah, like, here, do you mind if I...
The problem is the water's coming out.
Yeah.
But when you're fully activated and all of those behaviors, which are the mopping the floor behaviors, too much of your bandwidth, your intellectual bandwidth, your emotional bandwidth, your physical bandwidth is focused on heads down, trying to address this one situation.
Yeah, I can't see that pipe is broken over there. Yeah. I just see this water. I mop it up. There's more water. Crap. But what am I going to do? I got to mop this up.
So that's our little codependency spectrum.
Yeah.
Where codependency as a set of behaviors that arise in response to chronic toxic stress of feeling powerless. And then those behaviors, as you say, as you grew up, became habitual, almost second nature, as they do, I think, for a lot of people. Some of those people have managed to get the behaviors enough under control that it doesn't do serious damage to their life. But then you move through a spectrum where it can become that it takes over your life. So if it's a set of habitual behaviors, one question a lot of people have is, what are the replacement behaviors?
Well, first of all, that's important to say is you need to have replacement behaviors. Yeah, you can't just go, okay, I need to stop being codependent.
Right.
You know, so I'm going to stop people pleasing, or I'm going to stop caretaking. It needs to be replaced with a different version
Right.
Just different behaviors. And also, like we said, there's nothing inherently wrong with these behaviors. There's nothing wrong with pleasing people. There's nothing wrong with taking care of people.
And so you hear that question a lot from people, I think, who struggle with these habitual behaviors. If I do this for this person, am I being codependent or am I being a nice person?
Right.
Am I being a good friend? They have difficulty kind of teasing out the difference. How do you address that?
So yeah, for me, it's all about becoming conscious of the motivations of these behaviors. So if I'm people pleasing, or let's say I'm doing something to please someone, what is the motivation of that? Just stop, look at my emotions, read my emotions, which is something that I didn't do. I didn't learn how to read my emotions. I ignored my emotions. I avoided my emotions. They were unsafe. I mean, it's a matter of just going through a day, and whenever I'm faced with any kind of interpersonal interaction that gives me any kind of pause or any sort of emotion that I'm not understanding. In the past, it would be like if I have some kind of negative emotion, what I call bad emotions or something, like, this is making me feel anxious. My first impulse is I need to get out of feeling anxious, not figure out why I feel anxious. So I've already made mistake right from the get-go. And now I'm behaving from trying to avoid this anxiety. And I've already taught myself how to do that. Oh, just tell this person what they want to hear. Oh, they're asking me to do something. Just do it. Even if I don't want to do it and I don't like this person, or say this person's upset. Why are they upset? I don't care. They're just upset. I need to make sure they're not upset. So I'm going to do whatever I can. But it's important to take that step back and take that pause. It doesn't have to be a long pause, but just enough of a pause to go, what am I actually feeling here? What's my responsibility here?
Right. So if someone was expressing some anger at you,
then
the questions that you might ask yourself now would be,
well, the first question is, what do I think is the source of this anger? Why do I think this person is angry? Do I think it's justified, or do I not think it's justified? And if so, what's my next step here? If I don't think it's justified, is just walking away sufficient? Do I need to say something back? Do I need to get angry? Or maybe there is something I did or I said, and I need to now actually correct that, make an attempt to correct that. This person's anger is justified. I'm not going to just automatically appease. Every time I hear somebody angry, my initial response is, this person's angry. And like we were saying earlier, that's fine. That's fine to go, this person's angry, because this is a sign that something bad is happening somehow that this person is reacting to with anger. So, but the replacement behavior is trying to actually assess what is actually happening.
So self-reflection.
Yeah. Self-reflection and just a big picture look at what's going on. Actually having empathy for that person, not just going, they have anger. I need to squash that anger somehow.
So self-reflection, genuine empathy.
Presence,
actually listening and understanding what they're saying.
Yeah.
And trying to process it rather than reacting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds simple, and I'm not trying to oversimplify it. It's not easy to replace those behaviors because the first thing to happen is this internal feeling that I get, this anxious feeling. And I may always have that, but then, like we were saying, everyone has that to some extent, unless you're a psychopath or something, you don't have empathy.
I think so too. I mean, when people get angry around me, let alone at me, it can absolutely make me anxious.
Yeah.
When I get the sense that I'm disappointing people, when people ask me to do something for them and then I decide I have to say no, that's not a comfortable feeling. So part of it is also getting used to feeling that discomfort.
Yeah, right.
And deciding that that's not the most important emotion in the room at that point.
It's like when we were talking about where I had to, this is also from like episode 1 or 2 of season 2, where I had to get used to feeling shame. I just had to get used to feeling the things that I tried to avoid. So when these things happen that are making me feel anxious because someone's exhibiting anger, and my earlier reaction was to get out of feeling anxious as quickly as possible, rather than assess the actual situation, what's going on, and behave accordingly, which may only take 30 more seconds than my older codependent style of, get out of this, tell this person to lie or something. I need to diffuse this. Yeah. And then what happens when you're taking this pause too, and using self-reflection and getting in touch with how to set boundaries and value myself enough to have those boundaries. Now all these new steps are in place. And it took me a little while, and it's still taking me a while to really install these, because it can be difficult to know the difference between like, am I reacting to this initial panic, or am I going through these different behaviors? So it's, I'm just watching myself always, just kind of.
And then that is going to become habitual.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it will not take as much watching.
Yeah. It won't take as much conscious, like, am I being codependent here? Yes.
And what I like about seeing codependency as a set of behaviors that emerges from chaos or abuse and neglect, and then become habitual in such a way that interferes with one's life and relationships, is that habits can be broken.
Yeah.
Especially if you understand where they come from. Not easily, as you said, as we know.
Yeah.
We all have bad habits. They're hard to break.
Yeah.
But they're not ingrained in who you are as a person. And there's strategies for breaking habits that can be applied to codependent habits or any other kind of habit.
Yep. It takes motivation and self-love kind of to want to do that.
Mm-hmm. If there are listeners who have figured out some strategies to break their codependent habits, we'd love to hear about those.
And we hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. We'd love to hear from you, and or shoot us an email at codependentmind@gmail.com.
And we'll be back in a couple of weeks.